And after Judas received the piece of bread, Satan immediately entered it. Then Jesus said to Judas, "What you intend to do, do it quickly."
Have you ever heard of the Gospel of Judas? The idea may sound strange. After all, Judas is seen as the villain in the canonical Gospels, the best known in Christianity. But this text really exists. It is an ancient writing, already mentioned by the first generations of Christians. It was discovered in 1978 in a cave in Egypt, but only gained notoriety in 2004 when a Swiss researcher presented a study on it in Paris. In the meantime, the manuscript passed through several antiquities dealers. Because the document was warped and hardened by time, they tried to open it by force, using techniques such as freezing and thawing the material. These attempts ended up destroying between 10% and 15% of the text, which was lost forever. The Gospel of Judas was found within a volume that also brought together 3 other texts already known from other manuscripts: a letter from Peter to Philip, the first Apocalypse of James, the Book of Alangenes, also called the Book of the Stranger or the Book of the Stranger. The texts found were written in Coptic, a late form of the Egyptian language, although they had originally been written in Greek. The preserved manuscript has been dated to between the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. However, as early as the 2nd century, the Christian author Irenaeus of Lyons mentioned and criticized a Gospel of Judas associated with Gnostic groups. This indicates that, if the discovered manuscript is indeed the same text cited by Irenaeus, its origin goes back at least to the middle of the 2nd century or even earlier. When it came to the public, the Gospel of Judas drew a lot of attention, mainly because it was linked to the figure of the apostle known as the traitor in the canonical Gospels. Many have imagined it to be a version of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection narrated from the perspective of Judas, similar to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, perhaps even justifying his betrayal. But that is not what the text presents. Although it brings some elements in this sense, the Gospel of Judas is quite different and even stranger. It is not written by Judas, nor attributed to him. The Gospel does not present itself as a direct narrative of the apostle. The Gospel of Judas gets its title because Judas is the central character alongside Jesus. He is the only apostle named and appears in a very different way from the image presented in the biblical Gospels. According to this manuscript, Judas would have a superior position to the other disciples and would be the only one to truly understand who Jesus was and who was the true God. For this reason, Jesus maintains a special relationship with him, revealing secrets that no other disciple receives. The text begins, "The secret word of revelation that Jesus spoke to Judas Iscariot in the course of 8 days, 3 days before he celebrated the Passover." All content focuses on this period. Unlike the canonical Gospels, the manuscript does not address the birth, miracles, crucifixion, or resurrection of Jesus. Instead, it features discourses attributed to Jesus just days before the betrayal. In this work, Judas's betrayal gains a different interpretation not seen in the traditional Gospels. The central point to the text is in the revelations made to him about the origin, identity, and mission of Jesus. The text begins with a curious scene. Jesus is in Judea with his disciples and finds them sitting, gathered together and giving thanks for the bread. As he approaches, he laughs. The disciples, intrigued, ask, "Master, why do you laugh at our thanksgiving? What did we do? Isn't that appropriate?" Jesus answers, "I don't laugh at you. The praise you offer does not come of your own will, but to your God." They reply, "Master, you are the Son of God." And Jesus says enigmatically, "How do you know me? Truly, I say to you, no generation will know who I am among this people." This passage
typical of the Gospel of Judas, suggests that Jesus considers the action of the disciples foolish, because by thanking, they would be praising not the true God, but the Creator God, distinct from the God of Jesus. This difference is accentuated when the disciples are irritated by his words, and Jesus declares, "Your God who is in you and his powers have been angry with your souls. Whoever is strong among you, let him bring forth the perfect human being and stand before me." None of the disciples can answer this call, except Judas Iscariot, the most unlikely among them. Judas then introduces himself and declares, "I know who you are and where you came from." In the Gospel of Judas, we find a passage in which Judas addresses Jesus saying, "You came from the immortal Aeon of Barbelo, and from him who sent you, whose name I am not worthy to pronounce." To these lofty words, Jesus answers, "Get away from the other disciples, and I will reveal to you the mysteries of the kingdom."
From this point on, the text presents Jesus' discourses about the immortal aeons, the origin of the cosmos, and the idea that the world was not created by the true God, but by inferior and imperfect entities. According to the Gospel, the true God is called the Great Invisible Spirit, the one whom no angel has ever seen, whom no human thought can comprehend, and who has never been given any name. This being inhabits the infinite aeon, existing before all things. In the Gnostic context, aeon can mean both a divine dimension and a collective of spiritual beings. Thus, from the Great Invisible Spirit emanates a luminous cloud from which arises the first helper of creation, called the self-originated or God of Light. From the self-originated, 4 other beings are derived, and from these arise new generations of spiritual entities. Among them appears a figure that, in other Gnostic texts, is associated with the Aldebaoth. This being created 12 angels, among which one was terrible-looking. It exhaled fire from its face and had its appearance covered with blood. In the Gnostic text, a terrifying figure named Nebo appears, whose name means rebel. He is also identified as Yaldabaoth, a name that appears frequently in Gnostic writings. From the same cloud from which Nebo emerges, other angels are born, among them Suckless. Suckless declares, "Let us make man in our image and likeness," and molds Adam and Eve, imitating the form of angels. However, these angels are considered to be late, imperfect, and inferior emanations to the true God. Thus, according to this view, the material world and humanity itself were not created by the supreme God, but by inferior entities. This means that the reality in which we live does not correspond to the dimension of the true God. The reality of Jesus, on the other hand, is. This is what Jude recognizes at the beginning of the text when he says, "I know who you are and where you came from. You came from the immortal Aeon of Barbelo, and from him who sent you, whose name I am not worthy to pronounce." Barbelo, present in several Gnostic texts, is identified as the first luminous cloud, from which the self-originated comes. The being who sent Jesus is described as the Great Invisible Spirit, nameless, most perfect, and unapproachable. In this context, humanity would be imprisoned in an illusory and inferior reality. Jesus' mission would be to rescue souls and lead them back to the true principle, the one perfect and eternal God, not Suckless, who was falsely taken by God.
Judas's role in this scheme is also unique. According to the text, he would have a mission superior to that of the other apostles. At the end of the gospel, Jesus says to him, "Truly, I say to you, Judas, those who offer sacrifices to Suckless, they do what is evil. But you will surpass them all, for you will sacrifice the human being who carries me." The act of handing Jesus over to be executed, or more accurately, handing over the human aspect of Jesus, not the divine, is presented as a proper sacrifice in line with God's will. This gesture begins the saving work of Jesus and represents the defeat of the powers that rule the lower world, our world. According to the Gospel of Judas, this sacrifice is performed by Judas. Jesus explains to him that betrayal is actually a pleasant sacrifice, in contrast to the apostles' godly practices, such as thanksgiving in the breaking of bread. Such practices, according to the text, please only the creator of the material world, called Sak, producer of bread and material goods. When Judas understands this, Jesus says, "Everything has already been revealed to you. Lift up your eyes, see the luminous cloud and the stars that surround it. The star that guides the way is your star." Judas raises his eyes, enters the luminous cloud, and those present hear a voice coming from it. Unfortunately, the manuscript has many gaps, probably due to clumsy interventions by antiquarians before reaching the hands of specialists. Even in the complete parts, the text is difficult to interpret. For example, when it is said that he entered into the luminous cloud, it is not clear whether it refers to Judas in a spiritual sense, welcomed by God, or to Jesus, returning to his divine dimension and leaving his human aspect to be sacrificed. In any case, Judas fulfills his mission, handing Jesus over to the priests, performing what is described as betrayal and sacrifice. In addition, the difficulty of interpretation intensifies because the text is intended for a community based on secrets and private revelations, not for broad understanding. Some readers of this gospel possessed special knowledge that helped them to understand the true meaning of the text, going beyond appearances, metaphors, and allegories. These members of the community that produced and read the text had access to information that allowed them to read between the lines and fill in gaps that we cannot understand today. In any case, it is evident that this gospel is a composite of an ancient Gnostic group, possibly the so-called Sethians group, or 7 years group. This name does not refer to a count of years, but to Set, the third son of Adam, whose descent, according to the group's doctrine, represents humanity divided into different spiritual types or races.
The Sethian Set is not only the fleshly son of Adam, but the spiritual archetype or model of Seth. Only his offspring, according to the Sethians, would be fully saved and able to return to the Great Spirit. Other so-called psychic beings would also have a favorable faith, but complete destiny and full salvation were exclusive to the perfect generation, i.e. the offspring of Seth. This group receives various titles and concepts related to this descent, a theme that also appears in other texts of Gnostic groups, such as the Valentinians. The discussion about the division of the Gnostic groups and the definition of what the Gnostics would be is complex and still the subject of debate among historians. In several Gnostic texts, including the Gospel of Jude, we find the theme of revelations made only to one or a few disciples, separated from the main group. This probably served to mark a direct opposition to other Christian groups, especially what we now call Orthodox Christianity, in quotation marks because each group considered itself to have correct doctrine. The Gnostics were opposed to Christianity that we know today from the canonical Gospels. Therefore, they claimed that the apostles did not truly understand the teachings of Jesus. Consequently, Orthodox Christians, by following the doctrine of the apostles, would also have no access to real knowledge or gnosis. This true knowledge would have been secretly revealed to figures such as Mary Magdalene, Judas, and other characters from Apocryphal Gospels outside the biblical canon. Another central theme of the Gnostic texts is the complex origin of the cosmos. A perfect being progressively emanates a series of entities that are increasingly distant from perfection. This cosmogony or cosmology is especially detailed in the secret Gospel of John and dialogues with Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophical currents, which were very influential at the time. We can explore these themes further in other videos, for example by looking at the secret Gospel of John, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or Gnosticism more broadly. For those who want to know other apocryphal texts, we have already covered the Gospel of James and the Infancy Gospel of Thomas on the channel. References are in the video description.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next content.
Your